My new book, Pillars for Life, A Guide to Spiritual Ethics and Practice, is now out and available for you to read and purchase. You can check out our website, willowhealing.org, to find a link, or you can find it on Amazon. We look forward to getting your feedback, and if you love it, please leave a review and share with your friends. Now it's time for the show. Welcome to Willow Healing Matters, the podcast. We are so excited to have you joining us on this journey where we explore different ways to empower your soul, whether it's healing in your kitchen or all the way up in the corporate world. Come with us as we look into different ways to heal your mind, body, and soul. Hey everyone, it's Catherine Christiani with another episode of Willow Healing Matters, and I have a very special journey with you to share. Today I am joined with Casey, who is a man who is learning to live after an accident which left him with a traumatic brain injury, and he's learning to navigate his mental health. So a big welcome to the show, Casey, and I'm excited to unpack this journey with you.
Thank you for having me. It's exciting to be here today.
So if you don't mind me asking, what actually led to your TBI or traumatic brain injury?
I was working out of town for the company that I work for, and the accident happened. I was crushed by a large piece of steel. My head was between the ground and the large object, and that was a pretty serious accident that day.
Wow. I could imagine that would have been incredibly traumatic in itself, like being stuck there. And were you knocked out and then taken to hospital, or were you still awake through the whole thing?
I was knocked out. It was a short amount of time, but I basically came back to when the heavy metal object was lifted off of me. And that was kind of when I realized what had happened, and it was very scary in the moment.
Yeah, I guess that would be quite traumatic in itself. And what parts of your brain were impacted by that? This is my curiosity now.
So it was, I guess, like a crushing injury. So both sides were kind of smashed, I guess, together, and so the physical damage was hard to see, but it was apparent almost immediately that something had happened. I was very out of it and acting very strange. Also, to the side note, I didn't know it at the time, but there was a bunch of facial bones that had been broken. And
Yeah.
so the initial accident, the first thing to do was to treat what people could see, which was the facial injuries.
Yeah, and then I guess that's such a good lesson too of reminding everyone that's listening that any kind of trauma to the head needs to be followed up with really quickly because you don't know what's going on under the surface.
Yes. And that actually kind of stands out in this case is to when I had seen the doctor at the hospital, I had two surgeries in I think a year's time with 6 month recovery times each time, and nobody really thought at the time to actually see if there was any damage to my brain. So that was actually an afterthought. They treated my face, and then I started acting very strange at home. And that was when they started kind of looking into it and discovered that I actually had a TBI that was affecting more.
That is so concerning. I'm sorry. That is so concerning because, I just had images of I was a very big Grey's Anatomy fan when when McDreamy died because no one actually checked that he had a brain injury. That's exactly the image that I got that popped up when you were sharing that because, any kind of trauma to the head, it should always be checked out, whether and it doesn't even matter if it's something, like if you hit your head really hard and you pass out, you need to have some sort of check done. So how my goodness. So I guess from the knowing what I know about the brain from my background, like having both sides of your brain squished like that, it would have impacted everything, right? Because it would have just disrupted all the flow and where the liquid and the fluid was.
Yeah. So the initial X-rays from the day of the accident, they actually did not show any damage. And I was due to fly home the next day, and I knew, was self-aware that I had a head injury, and so I asked if I should see somebody to get CT scans, and I did an hour before my flight home, and that's when I found out that I had all the bones broken in my face. So the initial treatment was to just stitch a cut that was on my face, and then I was sent home. So through my own digging and trying to represent myself was how they found out that there was even broken bones from the second imaging in my face. And so there was no time in between where anybody did any checking to see if like my brain had been affected, I guess, or like post concussion syndrome or anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of weird like that, that it just, it was kind of like a trauma response. It was treat what was bleeding and then send me on my way.
Yeah, but it's been even like the fact it was a crush injury and not even checking all those things from it, like a typical crush injury response to. And it's really, I think it really highlights the need for better protocols, I think, more than anything.
I agree
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah, and I've had many guests on, and we talk about how broken the Western medical system is. But the fact that you were in, like, had this massive crush injury with a steel pipe to your head, essentially, and no one thought to check your brain or what's going on underneath is very concerning in itself. So, did you end up getting on the plane, or you ended up pushing for more assistance?
I did get on the plane because I found out that I couldn't actually even have my first facial reconstruction surgery because the swelling was too bad. Because all of my eye socket was crushed, all the way around. The orbital floor was completely shattered, and so the swelling was so bad that my eye was actually moving in the socket. So they said that they couldn't even operate until the swelling had gone down. So I flew home, and then I waited for 2 weeks before I could even see a surgeon.
Wow. And in the meantime, had anything been done about the brain injury or still didn't know at this point?
Still didn't know.
Wow. Wow. Um so what led you to actually getting that diagnosis of the TBI, like the traumatic brain injury? Who finally figured it out?
So over the course of a year, I started noticing that I was acting very strange to my own character, I guess. That I was doing things odd. I didn't have very much mental clarity. I was struggling with the smallest tasks like reading. Mental emotions were highs and lows. I mean, waking up angry for absolutely no reason and not understanding why. The defining day was I was at work, and one of my coworkers was very upset with me because I was acting like I didn't know how to do my job, and I was making it harder on my coworkers. And so I stopped and I asked him, and I asked, am I acting strange? Am I doing things funny? Um, and he had an outburst with me, and he said, like, you are like brand new here, you don't know what you're doing, you're lost all of the time, you can't follow simple steps or instructions, you need to figure out what you have going on. And so that day I actually called my doctor and I asked about it, and that's when they started the testing.
Okay. Yeah. Um, yeah. Well, I'm glad that you were actually still enough in that awareness because, it could have been you were having, how do you know you weren't having any bleeds or anything like that too? Because, that amount of trauma to the brain. And it doesn't surprise me you're having trouble reading and remembering directions and things like that because the sides of your brain, one side, well, both sides are where all your language centers are stored, so it doesn't surprise me at all, and especially your memories that you push on that enough, you get to your hippocampus, which is where all your memories are stored. So, it's not surprising that all the swelling that was probably happening there, was causing that impact. So once you finally, someone finally actually realized they'd stuffed up and we're now trying to rectify it. What was kind of the process from there? Did you have to have further surgery, or was it just to sit and wait till swelling and readjustment, or what kind of happened from there?
So the uniqueness was that it was so long until they discovered kind of what was wrong. Then it was uncovering what was happening and the side effects of it. The easiest way I can explain it is if you broke your leg, but you had absolutely no idea that your leg was broken, and you tried to walk, but you couldn't figure out how to walk. It was like being completely unaware or like self unaware of what was happening. So everything was it was being discovered as it was happening. Um, an example would be like my emotions. Finally one day I asked why do I wake up immediately angry when there's nothing wrong? Um, why do I start crying when I can't find, say, a can of soup in my cupboard? Why am I doing these very strange things that seem not normal to most people? And so the process was figuring out as life was happening in real time what was different than what it was before, while being unaware to what was going on.
Yeah, and I guess it's almost like your brain had defaulted to the very reptilian brain, right? That survival instinct. So it was like you not being able to find food. Well, that's life or death. So you're going to start crying because your brain can't discern everything in the middle. It can't discern that's frustrating or that's annoying. It's just like, well, we need to eat and we can't eat. So that's going to be, really upsetting, or even I almost feel like you were waking up angry because no one had found the trauma. Like how like you were neglected from that state. You put your trust into people who didn't do their job and didn't figure it out, and that would make me freaking angry too.
um, yeah, it really started affecting every facet of my life. At the time I was married and things were becoming really bad at my household, and
Yeah.
that was also a determining factor. Using my significant other's knowledge at the time of how I was acting different was helping to discover what was wrong, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because she was like the baseline for you. Like she could discern for you what's different, and it wasn't because you didn't have the capability to rationalize that because your brain was still in, I'm in a traumatic state and I can't do logical and rational thinking right now. Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
go
So
ahead.
I know I was going to say, so I guess that would be lead to where we kind of started with your introduction of navigating that mental health, because it makes it really difficult to, I guess, accept that, I'm assuming there was permanent ongoing damage because of A, how long it took to be picked upon, and B, the extent of the crushing that would have impacted your brain.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, there's still a lot of things that are, I mean, I am still actively treating even to this time. But there are still a lot of things that were severely affected. This time last year I was basically learning to read again,
Yeah.
and I didn't know it until I realized that I was struggling. So it's very much a reactive healing journey. It's not, it wasn't proactive. It's figure out what is wrong and then treat accordingly, and that's kind of been the status quo for the entire journey.
Yeah, and I think that's such a difficult journey in itself, especially like learning to read again and that sort of thing. I know my dad, he had a brain injury, but he was 5. But he always said the hardest thing was to learn to speak and walk again. Like he said, those basic functions, like you described earlier with the broken leg, were the hardest things for him to come back from and to rediscover again, because you don't realize how, as you're growing up, we're just wired to learn those things easily, but when you've already learned them and have to relearn them. But I feel like the beautiful miracle in all that is also showing that your brain can be resilient and can recover, and it can, yes, it's painful and long and a pain in the ass, but at the same time, it has that beautiful neuroplasticity where it can actually, rewire again and start to shift again. And I guess for anyone who's like, what is she talking about? There was this theory for years and years and years that once you hit a certain age, your brain was fixed, like it couldn't change, it couldn't rewire, it couldn't change. And then all this research came out. It's like, actually, no, it's like plastic, it's malleable, it can shift. For example, if you damage one part of your brain, other parts of the brain will actually pick that up, and they've shown it with studies with people who it might be deaf and they use sign language. So the parts of their language brain aren't as strong, but then other parts of their brain that obviously tap into like the motor planning are a lot stronger because they've taken over kind of some of the language aspects. So the same with people who are blind and things like that. So it's really interesting because this is just my curiosity. I feel like the parts of your brain that weren't as damaged as much are probably helping those parts that had the impact and the greatest blunt to recover and rebalance whilst, and I imagine there's still swelling happening and changing and everything only because of the extent of what happened to your head.
Yeah, it's fun that you brought up the neuroplasticity. The amount of things that I've learned about the human brain up to this point are incredible. The neuroplasticity is a fascinating. You can't even call it a theory anymore. I mean, it's really a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It seems like some of my deficits then turned into opposites, right? The things that I was struggling with would be harder, but the things that I would use to compensate for that would actually be significantly stronger, almost superhuman. It's incredible. It really is.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it, right? Like I feel like sometimes when you can see, despite all the crap you've been through, Casey, to see that, oh my goodness, now I've got these gifts that I never had before, it can be really amazing. Even I've worked with a lot of children. My background is a speech language pathologist, but we had to study the brain a lot. But I've worked with a lot of children with autism spectrum disorder, and their brains actually have a different balance of gray matter and white matter to what typical brains do. But then they also have these amazing gifts that we don't have. So it's really, especially like their visual acuity and their ability, like their visual. So usually like 90% of the time was really strong. I'm like, how did you see that? Like, how did you notice that? And it was just, they're also really good at focusing on one thing, but to a point that it can be a detriment too. So exactly like you said, you have these skills now that used to compensate for things that were harder, that have been boosted and are amazing. But at the same time, now those things you have to work on to get back and strengthen,
Yeah.
and learning to read again. For teaching kids how to read for years, it's not a fun journey, like it's just English is the most fickle language, I have to say. Like, the amount of times, especially, I don't know if your spelling was and writing was impacted, but, it does not make sense. Like, you cannot tell me yacht has any logical spelling to it. I'm sorry. You know, yatchet. No,
Right.
it's yat. Yeah. So things like that would be incredibly hard, especially as an adult where, you just took it for granted, right? That you could read and write.
Yeah, that it's funny that you say that because there was a lot of things in the English language at the time that didn't make sense after the fact. And it almost, you could see in my writing that I would almost start like spelling phonetically sometimes.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
just by the way it sounded, because there was a spot that between thinking the word and writing it down that something just wasn't working correctly. And then to second that part, following lines left to right, and not losing my place. Or the bigger one was reading a paragraph and then by paragraph number 2, forgetting what paragraph number 1 was.
Hmm.
So it was a unique experience. I mean, there's still a little bit of trouble, but it's amazing that I was able to recover so much.
Yeah. And I guess, how have you gone with accepting who you are now versus who you were before?
That, if I'm honest, is still a journey. That is probably single-handedly the hardest thing, in my opinion. And I've joined like support groups and met friends that deal with things similar to me, and that always seems to be the thing that sticks out is, why can't I do what I used to be able to do, or why am I different? Somebody actually, we'll only talk one very small negative, but somebody actually told me in one of their anger spouts that they didn't know who I was because I was so different, and that their version of me was dead because I was so different from the person that I used to be, that it was like meeting somebody new and that the person they knew was dead. And to hear that and process that was extremely difficult. It was very hurtful at the time, but it really brought everything into clarity for me because I had to accept that also, that the old version of me was dead. That it was a new me, a different version. And so that whole process is probably to this day still one of the hardest parts of the whole thing, is
Yeah.
accepting the new reality, how things are different, and then learning how to adapt to what is basically a different life. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I feel it's so interesting because when you choose to change and it's on your own action, people still drop away too for the same thing. They're like, oh, we don't know who you are anymore. But it's different because it wasn't your choice to change. And it's almost like that, it's that your power is taken away from that, right? So I feel that that's why that comment was so hurtful, because it wasn't your choice to change. It's just, that's how it was. But then at the same time, it's reflecting back to you, that, that person's not meant to be in your life anymore, right? There's that saying, people come in for a reason, a season, a cycle, or a lifetime. And, it is an adjustment, but it depends if people can see you for who you are now versus who you were before, and accept that. Some people can't handle that much change, and that's on them. It's not on you.
Right. Yeah, this whole experience really brought into clarity, relationships and dynamics with other people. Some people just don't have the ability to meet you where you're at. When I was struggling, there were just people that didn't understand what had happened or how it was affecting me, and so they didn't have the ability to, I guess, be empathetic towards that. Um, so it changed a lot of relationship dynamics for me.
And did you end up staying in your job, or did you have to change what you were doing, or what kind of happened there?
At this time, so I guess I should actually say that also. I worked in construction, so this happened on a construction site. It is still unclear at this time if I will be able to return to that line of work. Of course, I'm working towards, that is kind of my goal. Is I did very much enjoy what I did for a living, so it's unclear, and there may be a different direction that I have to go. But that's, at this time, is still kind of up in the air.
Well, I feel that it's almost like, we try and see the gift in things, right? And it's almost like, as much as, you've gone through this trauma and everything, and I'm not belittling that, but if you could see it as a gift and a blessing, what I keep hearing coming through is that, well, now you get to choose who you want to be, right? And now you get to choose who you want to have in your life and who actually values you deep down, for this person that you've had to shed all these layers to relearn to become, because you're choosing to become that person, and you're not um created into that person by everyone else's beliefs and that sort of thing. Now it's like, well, no, I've got to put extra effort into whatever I do to make it happen. I'm going to choose what I freaking want to show up as in this world.
Yeah. Yes. I said that on Pete's podcast. Shout out to Pete, of course, because he made all the connections here. But at the time, it didn't feel, of course, through most of the process, it did not feel like it was ever going to be a good ending to a story. But after realizing, and what I said on Pete's podcast was, it's like re-engineering a human being. I mean, you get to pick and choose what you are going to rebuild and what your strengths are going to be. And I believe to this day it has made me a better person. Um, it certainly did not feel like that in the beginning.
No, it wouldn't have. No, it wouldn't have. But even, to have to relearn to read, I bet you now you're grateful for every word that you can read, and that probably wasn't there before, and the fact that, those people, yes, they said those terrible things to you, but at the same time, um, you can go, well, they definitely weren't meant to stay in my life, and you don't have time for the BS anymore. you know, like you're taking back your life and your identity. It's not worth having those people that aren't going to see you for who you're meant to be.
Exactly. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I think the one that stands out the most is that through the injury, it's very common for people with TBIs or post concussion syndrome or anything related to that to have unregulated emotions,
Mm.
which I still, struggle with some of that today. But an example of, say, something that makes me happy, like I was at a wedding last year, and so I feel the emotion so deeply that at something like a wedding, I am just completely overjoyed. It's like really exaggerating that happiness and that emotion, which is incredible. Um,
I almost feel like you have such a gift there because the filters have been taken away, right? Like you actually can experience those emotions in the extreme. And as much as that sounds terrible, it's also a blessing because the quicker you can feel an emotion and fully immerse it in your body, the quicker you can let it go. It's not going to fester and end up having other implications for you long term. So, but I fully get what you mean because when I tapped into more into my emotions, not because I had a TBI, but just getting more in touch with my emotions. I cry in so many films. Like I'm there watching a Disney film the other week with my son at the movies, and they just it was Elio, like if anyone's seen it. But anyway, the dad gets out of like he's like this war person, he gets out of this suit to go cuddle his child because his child was dying and he needed his warmth. And I was like, oh, he did. Like I was in tears. And I'm like, oh my goodness. But I don't, and I never used to be that person. And now so many things just move me to tears. I cannot watch violence or things like that anymore. And I'm okay with that because it just means that I'm really in tune with my emotions. So I feel like that's become a superpower for you now, right?
Absolutely. If I tell a friend, I'm proud of you, there's times in our life where we may say something that, is just, I guess, correct to the moment, right? It's what you should say or want to say to embrace somebody. But like when I say something like I'm proud of you now, it's an overwhelming feeling of like
Yeah.
I'm actually extremely proud of you. It's very much that it's the emotion, not just the words anymore.
Yeah.
Um so if I
Yeah.
say something to somebody, it's with overwhelming feeling. There is
Yeah.
there is no filter anymore, like you were saying.
Yeah. But how authentic's that?
It,
Like,
it it's
you know,
it's amazing.
yeah, exactly. And we spend so long trying to navigate through people's masks by putting on our own masks to, tamper down our emotions. And yet this injury led to you not being able to do that anymore. And suddenly you have to embrace fully who you are. And those masks aren't there. So people get to see Casey is Casey and they take it or they leave it.
Pretty much. That sometimes does go if somebody does something silly. I mean, it's immediately on my face, so they see that right away. I could do without that sometimes, but
Ah,
um, you don't always get the good without the bad, right? So, but yeah, it's very authentic. It's very much no longer masked, like you were saying.
yeah, definitely. And as we start to finish our time together, Casey, I ask the guests that come on the show if you could heal or change something in the world, apart from the medical system, maybe, I would ask, what would it be?
Um, I think the biggest thing that I would like to see more of is kindness and understanding. Um, because we all come from different places and all of our journeys are different. And if we just took a moment to expend more energy being kind to people, I do think that the world would be a better place.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed.
Um,
And yeah. And I always say to people, this is why I try and instill in my son too, you never know what sort of day or what's happening for that person, even if they're terrible to you, even if they're unkind, if you can stay in your kindness, it's not about, dismissing their behavior, but if you cannot go down to their level, it creates such a different energy. And, I sometimes, you'll get the grumpy shop clerk, and I make it my mission to make them smile about something. And even if you get a smirk at the end, you're like, yes. You know?
I love
And it
that.
can,
I think that's
yeah,
fabulous.
yeah. Well, they might have had the most terrible customer before you. Why not just be really kind to them? And sometimes they get taken back when you say to them, "I hope a great day," and they're like, "That's my line." Like, what? What? Why is the customer telling me that? It's like, what? So I'm with you there. Like, definitely, need more kindness and compassion, and just understanding, like you said. And if people want to come find you or follow your journey a bit more, Casey, where can they find you?
I am on TikTok. I am at the at is at the good life underscore 2025. I think some variation of that. I'm new to Instagram, or new again to Instagram, with the same same handle. And then the podcast, but this is my second one. I was on Pete versus Anxiety, and now Willow Healing.
There you go. So I'll make sure to put all those details in the show notes. And if you want to follow Casey on his journey, especially if you've had anyone in your life with a TBI, it's really great to get some understanding about what they might be going through. And sometimes that understanding can help have a bit more compassion too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would like to throw this out there to anybody that maybe is wondering or has some questions or is dealing with that. I am more than happy to talk to anybody about it. My life is an open book from this point, because if I can do something to help other people, I would be happy to do that. So if anybody has any questions about the experience, or somebody that's dealing with it, I'd love to help.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Casey. And I'll make sure, like I said, to make sure all your social media link handles are in the show notes so that people can come and follow you or drop you a DM on Instagram as well. So thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you next episode. Thank you for listening to Willow Healing Matters, the podcast. We have so much love and gratitude that you have taken the time out of your day to empower you on your healing journey. The views shared by the person being interviewed might not necessarily reflect that of the host and should be used at your own discernment. Trust what resonates for you and follow your heart and soul guidance. If you have any underlying medical conditions or mental health issues, please consult with your healthcare provider before pursuing any of the recommendations. Likewise, you can always contact the person being interviewed to find out more information. This can be found in the show notes. Remember to activate, align, heal, empower, and find love in everything that you do.